The iron shackles around Nix Calder's wrists have worn grooves in her skin. But pain is nothing new. She's been carrying it for years, hidden beneath the enforced submission that marks her as the lowest of the low in pack hierarchy. Dragged through the tunnel beneath the arena, she can hear the roar of the crowd above, bloodthirsty voices calling for entertainment that will come at the cost of her bones, her dignity, her life. The guards who haul her forward don't bother with conversation. She's merchandise now, a broken Omega purchased from a failing pack to serve as spectacle for wolves who need reminding of what happens to those who forget their place. The arena's sand is dark with years of spilled blood, and as they shove her through the gate into the harsh light of the fighting ring, Nix feels the weight of 1,000 staring eyes assessing her worth as entertainment. She's small, scarred from years of corrective discipline, her scent muted by chemical suppressants that have kept her wolf buried so deep she sometimes forgets she has one. The crowd's laughter ripples through the stands as the announcer's voice booms over their amusement, declaring her the evening's opening act, a weak Omega thrown to the wolves as a lesson in proper submission. But beneath the scars and suppressants, beneath the learned helplessness and manufactured weakness, something stirs in response to the sand beneath her feet and the scent of violence in the air, something that has been waiting, patient as stone, for the right moment to remind the world why some powers were meant to be sealed rather than destroyed. Tonight, as the crowd bays for blood and the alphas settle back to enjoy her humiliation, Nix Calder is about to discover that she was never as weak as they made her believe, and that the Black Lycan doesn't kneel to anyone. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale. The announcer's voice carries across the arena like thunder, each word designed to whip the crowd into a frenzy of anticipation that makes the stone walls vibrate with bloodlust. Tonight, we present a special entertainment for your amusement, he bellows, his amplified voice echoing off ancient stones that have witnessed centuries of violence sanctioned by Alpha authority. A demonstration of what happens to Omegas who forget their place in the natural order. Nix stands in the center of the fighting ring, iron shackles binding her wrists behind her back, while thousands of wolves observe her with the predatory satisfaction of apex predators about to witness the destruction of something weak and defenseless. The arena's sand shifts beneath her bare feet, still warm from the afternoon sun, but cooling rapidly as evening shadows stretch across the fighting space. Above her, arranged in ascending tiers of luxury that reflect pack hierarchies with ruthless precision, the most powerful alphas in the continent lean forward in their seats with expressions of eager anticipation. Nix Calder, the announcer continues, consulting papers that contain details about her that she wishes weren't public knowledge. 23 years old, purchased from the Shadowmere Pack for the crime of defying Alpha authority. Scent suppressed, wolf dormant, classified as non-threatening to pack stability. The crowd's laughter is sharp with cruel amusement as they absorb this catalog of her supposed deficiencies. In a world where strength determines survival and weakness invites destruction, being announced as non-threatening is equivalent to being marked for entertainment that will end in her death. The suppressants coursing through her system ensure that her wolf remains buried too deep to provide assistance, while the shackles guarantee that she won't be able to defend herself against whatever challenger they've selected for her destruction. Her opponent tonight, the announcer's voice rises to accommodate the crowd's growing excitement, is Gareth Vane, Alpha Warrior of the Ironspire Pack, veteran of 37 arena victories, undefeated champion of the Northern Fighting Circuit. The gate opposite Nix's entrance explodes outward as Gareth Vane enters the arena with the fluid confidence of a predator who has never encountered prey capable of offering meaningful resistance. He's massive even by Alpha standards, standing nearly 7 feet tall with muscle definition that speaks of decades spent perfecting the art of controlled violence. Scars crisscross his torso like a roadmap of battles won and enemies destroyed, while his amber eyes hold the cold satisfaction of someone who has learned to take pleasure in the systematic destruction of anything weaker than himself. The crowd erupts in approval as he raises his arms to acknowledge their adoration, his grin revealing teeth that have been sharpened to points in accordance with fighting traditions that celebrate the predatory nature of wolf hierarchy. When his gaze settles on Nix, his expression shifts to something resembling disappointed boredom. She's not even interesting enough to provide worthwhile entertainment. The rules are simple, the announcer declares. as arena officials retreat to safety beyond the fighting space. Combat continues until one participant can no longer defend themselves. Surrender is permitted, but rarely accepted. Medical intervention will be provided only after combat has concluded. The implication is clear enough that even Nyx, despite years of forced submissiveness, understands exactly what's expected of her. She's meant to provide a few minutes of desperate struggle before Gareth tears her apart for the crowd's amusement, a living demonstration of alpha superiority over omega weakness that will reinforce social hierarchies through public spectacle. "Begin," the announcer commands, his voice cutting through the sudden silence that falls over the arena as thousands of wolves lean forward to witness the inevitable destruction of someone who dared to defy the natural order. Gareth moves toward her with predatory grace, taking his time because he knows she has nowhere to run and no way to fight back effectively. The shackles limit her movement to helpless stumbling, while the suppressants ensure that any attempt to shift will fail before it can provide her with claws or fangs capable of inflicting meaningful damage. "This won't take long," he tells her, his voice carrying easily across the sand despite its conversational volume. "Try to make it entertaining for them, Omega. They paid good money to watch you break." He lunges forward with explosive speed, claws extended to rake across her torso and wounds designed to incapacitate rather than kill immediately. But as his strike connects and blood spatters across the sand, as pain flares through her system and the crowd roars its approval, something unexpected happens. The suppressants fail. Not gradually, not partially, but completely and instantaneously, as if whatever chemical bonds have been keeping her wolf buried have suddenly dissolved under the influence of forces beyond scientific understanding. Her scent changes so abruptly that wolves throughout the arena jerk back in their seats with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. The air itself seems to thicken, taking on weight and pressure that makes breathing difficult for everyone present except Nyx, whose entire body begins to vibrate with power that has been building beneath the surface for years. The sand around her feet starts to tremble, small grains dancing in patterns that suggest forces operating according to laws that have nothing to do with normal pack dynamics. Gareth stumbles backward, his confident expression replaced by something approaching fear, as his alpha instincts scream warnings about prey that has suddenly become something far more dangerous than anything he's encountered in 37 previous victories. "What?" he begins, but his words are cut off, as Nyx's eyes open, and the golden irises have been replaced by something that reflects light like polished obsidian. The change begins in her bones, power flowing through her system, like molten metal replacing blood, reshaping muscle and sinew according to specifications that predate modern pack hierarchies by millennia. The iron shackles around her wrists crack under pressure that shouldn't be possible for someone who was classified as non-threatening less than 5 minutes earlier. "Impossible," someone whispers from the luxury boxes where the most powerful alphas sit in stunned disbelief. "The suppressants should prevent any shifting for hours." But whatever is happening to Nyx has nothing to do with normal shifting processes, and everything to do with power that operates according to its own ancient laws. Her scent continues to evolve, taking on depths and complexities that speak to wolves on levels deeper than conscious thought, triggering responses that bypass rational decision-making entirely. Throughout the arena, wolves begin dropping to their knees as instinct overrides pride and training. First the younger ones, whose control isn't strong enough to resist the pull of recognition that screams through their systems like wildfire. Then the more experienced fighters, their expressions showing confusion and growing terror as they find themselves compelled to submit to authority they don't understand, but can't resist. Even Gareth, the undefeated champion who has never shown deference to anyone except the alpha who owns his contract, finds himself fighting the overwhelming urge to lower his head in acknowledgement of dominance that makes his own alpha status feel like a child's pretend game. The announcer's voice, when it finally cuts through the stunned silence, is high with panic that transforms his professional composure into barely controlled hysteria. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to be experiencing technical difficulties with the evening's entertainment. Arena security is requested to..." His words die as Nyx straightens to her full height, the iron shackles falling away like broken jewelry, her transformation reaching completion in a display of power that redefines everyone's understanding of what's possible within the established order of pack hierarchy. She's still recognizably herself, but enhanced in ways that make her previous appearance seem like a pale shadow of her true nature. Her hair has darkened to black, shot through with silver. Her skin carries the luminous quality of moonlight on water, and her presence commands attention in ways that have nothing to do with physical beauty, and everything to do with authority, that operates on frequencies deeper than conscious awareness. When she speaks, her voice carries across the arena without effort, reaching every corner of the vast space with clarity that makes amplification unnecessary. "My name is Nyx Calder," she says, her words ringing with power that makes the ancient stones resonate in harmony. "And I am not your entertainment." Gareth launches himself toward her in a desperate attempt to re-establish control over a situation that has spiraled far beyond anything he was prepared to handle. But his charge is met, not with omega submission or even beta resistance, but with the kind of casual dismissal that one might offer to an irritating insect. She doesn't dodge his attack so much as exist in a space where his claws and teeth can't reach her, moving with fluid grace that suggests mastery of physical laws that most wolves never learn to perceive. When she strikes back, it's with force that sends him flying across the arena to impact against the stone wall with enough violence to crack the ancient masonry. The crowd's roar has transformed from bloodthirsty anticipation to something approaching panic as the evening's entertainment evolves into something unprecedented in the arena's long history. Throughout the stands, wolves continue dropping to their knees as her presence affects them in ways that bypass conscious resistance. But it's in the luxury boxes, where the continent's most powerful alphas sit in stunned disbelief, that the real revolution begins. Because even those whose authority has never been challenged, whose dominance has never been questioned, find themselves fighting the overwhelming compulsion to acknowledge her supremacy, and in the deepest part of their minds, in the place where inherited memories preserve knowledge that conscious thought has forgotten, ancient recognition stirs, not of an omega who has somehow accessed inappropriate power, but of something that predates their understanding of hierarchy entirely, the Black Lycan. The force that was supposed to be legend, myth, bedtime stories told to children who needed reminding that some powers were too dangerous to exist in the modern world. Except she's standing in their arena, radiating authority that makes every wolf present understand exactly why their ancestors had worked so hard to ensure she remained nothing more than cautionary tale. As Nyx turns her attention from Gareth's unconscious form to the thousands of wolves staring at her in various states of submission and terror, her smile reveals teeth that have begun changing in ways that suggest her transformation is far from complete. "Now," she says, her voice carrying absolute authority that makes resistance feel not just impossible, but inappropriate, "let's discuss the rules, because apparently you've forgotten what happens when you mistake sealed power for weakness." The arena falls into silence so complete that the sound of her bare feet on sand seems to echo like thunder as she begins walking toward the luxury boxes, where the alphas who purchased her for entertainment sit in recognition of what they've accidentally unleashed. Because the Black Lycan doesn't need to fight to establish dominance. She simply needs to be what she is, and let the natural order rearrange itself around her presence. The silence that follows Nyx's declaration stretches across the arena like a living thing, heavy with the weight of ancient recognition that transforms bloodthirsty entertainment into something approaching religious revelation. 5,000 wolves remain frozen in various states of submission, their bodies responding to authority that operates on frequencies deeper than conscious thought, while their minds struggle to process what they're witnessing. In the luxury boxes that tower above the fighting ring, the continent's most powerful alphas find themselves in the unprecedented position of feeling genuine fear for the first time in centuries. These are wolves whose authority has reshaped the political landscape of entire territories, whose decisions determine the fate of millions, whose dominance has never been successfully challenged by anyone brave enough or foolish enough to try. And they're staring down at a woman they purchased as disposable entertainment, watching her approach their elevated positions with the kind of casual confidence that suggests she considers their accumulated power to be nothing more than an interesting curiosity. "Security to the arena floor," Alpha Prime Magnus Aldrich commands, his voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes from recognizing threats that shouldn't exist, according to everything he understands about pack dynamics. Full suppression protocols, chemical restraints, whatever it takes to contain this situation before it spreads beyond the arena. The response to his order is immediate. Arena guards pour through entrance gates carrying equipment designed to subdue even the most powerful shifters through chemical means that bypass natural resistance. tranquilizer weapons loaded with compounds that could drop a raging alpha in seconds, nets woven with silver threads that burn shifter skin on contact, containment devices that have never failed to neutralize threats to established authority. But as they surround Nyx in tactical formations that represent decades of experience in handling dangerous individuals, something unprecedented happens. The weapons refuse to fire. Not mechanical malfunction, not human hesitation, but the simple impossibility of directing aggressive action towards someone whose presence has triggered recognition protocols buried so deep in wolf genetics that conscious resistance is meaningless. The guards' hands shake as they try to aim at her, their training warring with instincts that scream warnings about attempting to harm something sacred. Fascinating, Nyx observes, her voice carrying easily across the vast space despite its conversational volume. Your toys seem to have developed moral qualms about their intended purpose. She continues walking toward the luxury boxes, her bare feet silent on sand that shifts beneath her weight in patterns that suggest forces operating according to laws that have nothing to do with normal physics. As she moves, the transformation that began with her blood continues to evolve, power flowing through her system in waves that reshape not just her physical form, but the fundamental nature of her existence. Her scent has become something beyond classification, not omega submission, not beta competence, not alpha dominance, but something that encompasses all hierarchies while transcending them entirely. Wolves throughout the arena find themselves experiencing responses they don't have language to describe. Terror mixed with reverence, hostility transformed into protection, rebellion converted to worship. Stand down, Alpha Prime Aldrich commands his security forces, his tactical mind recognizing that traditional responses to threats are not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive in this situation. Establish a perimeter but do not engage unless directly threatened. The decision to avoid confrontation proves wise as Nyx reaches the base of the luxury seating area, where ancient stone steps lead upward toward positions of power that have been occupied by Alpha authority for so long that most wolves have forgotten they were ever anything else. Alpha Prime Aldrich, she says, her black eyes finding his face among the dozens of powerful wolves who stare down at her, with expressions ranging from fascination to terror. How generous of you to purchase my services for this evening's entertainment. I trust you're satisfied with the value you've received for your investment. What are you? The question comes from Alpha Elena Corvus, whose territory spans the eastern seaboard, and whose political influence extends into the highest levels of continental governance. Her voice carries the kind of careful neutrality that suggests someone evaluating threats while avoiding actions that might trigger catastrophic responses. I'm exactly what your ancestors worked so hard to convince you was impossible, Nyx replies, beginning to climb the steps with unhurried confidence that makes her approach feel inevitable, rather than aggressive. The Black Lycan, the force that predates your hierarchies, your territories, your carefully constructed systems of dominance and submission. The Black Lycan is a myth, Alpha Thane Blackwater interjects, though his voice lacks the conviction his words attempt to project. Bedtime stories told to children, legends without historical foundation. Legends with enough historical foundation that your predecessors dedicated considerable resources to ensuring I remained safely sealed away from any possibility of awakening. Nyx's smile reveals teeth that have completed their transformation into something designed for purposes that extend far beyond simple predation. Suppressants that prevented shifting, chemical bonds that kept my wolf buried beneath layers of artificial submission, training regimens designed to convince me that weakness was my natural state. As she speaks, the truth of what has been done to her becomes clear to everyone present. The systematic suppression, the carefully maintained ignorance of her true nature, the elaborate construction of circumstances designed to prevent her from ever discovering what she really is, all of it has been orchestrated by authorities who understood exactly what they were containing and why it had to be contained. How long? Alpha Prime Aldrich asks, his tactical mind already calculating the implications of deception that has been maintained across multiple generations. How long have we been keeping you prisoner without understanding what we were actually holding? Since childhood, Nyx replies, her voice carrying depths of pain that have been transformed into something far more dangerous than simple revenge. Since before I was old enough to understand why the other children were encouraged to avoid me, why my adoptive family received payments for maintaining my suppression, why I was never allowed to participate in pack ceremonies that might have awakened abilities they preferred to keep dormant. The revelation that her captivity has been systematic, deliberate, and maintained through generational conspiracy sends waves of unease through the assembled alphas. Because if one black Lycan has been hidden in their midst for decades without their knowledge, the possibility exists that there are others whose awakening could destabilize the entire continental power structure. The suppressants have failed, Dr. Sarah Chen observes from her position among the medical consultants who attend arena events, to treat injuries too severe for natural healing. Whatever chemical bonds were maintaining her dormancy have been completely dissolved. She's accessing power that should have remained permanently inaccessible. How? Alpha Elena Corvus demands, her attention shifting between Nyx and the medical experts, whose understanding of shifter physiology should have made such failures impossible to achieve. Blood, Nyx says simply, gesturing toward the sand where Gareth's claws had opened wounds across her torso. Violence. Pain that triggered responses the suppressants couldn't contain. Your arena provided exactly the conditions necessary to break bonds that were never intended to be broken. The irony is not lost on anyone present. In their eagerness to humiliate and destroy what they perceived as defiant Omega weakness, they have created the precise circumstances required to awaken power that makes their own authority seem like children playing at dominance. But it's Alpha Magnus Voss, the eldest and most experienced ruler present, whose observation cuts to the heart of what everyone is thinking, but hasn't dared to voice aloud. If you're truly the Black Lycan, if you possess the power our ancestors feared enough to seal away, then what do you intend to do with that power now that you've reclaimed it? The question hangs in the air like a sword suspended over everything they've built, because the answer will determine whether their carefully constructed civilization survives the evening, or whether it transforms into something unrecognizable to accommodate forces that predate their understanding of order itself. Nyx pauses in her climb toward their elevated positions, her black eyes sweeping across faces that represent centuries of accumulated authority and influence. When she speaks, her words carry the weight of decisions that will reshape the continental political landscape in ways that extend far beyond simple revenge. What I intend, she says quietly, her voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast arena despite its conversational volume, is to remind you why the Black Lycan was never meant to serve anyone's authority but her own. She raises her hand, and throughout the arena, wolves who have been kneeling in involuntary submission suddenly find themselves compelled to stand. Not by their own choice, but by command that bypasses conscious decision-making entirely, their bodies responding to authority that recognizes no hierarchy except its own supremacy. You've built your power on the assumption that strength determines dominance, that alpha authority represents the apex of natural hierarchy, that omegas exist to serve and betas exist to facilitate that service. Her voice begins to carry harmonics that resonate through stone and bone with equal facility. But you've forgotten that all hierarchies exist only by the consent of forces powerful enough to reshape them at will. The demonstration that follows is both subtle and overwhelming in its implications. Without visible effort, without apparent strain, Nyx begins reorganizing the social dynamics of 5,000 wolves through pure application of will that acknowledges no resistance as meaningful. Alphas find themselves compelled to defer to betas they've spent lifetimes dominating. Omegas discover authority flowing through them that transforms submission into command that cannot be ignored or resisted. The carefully maintained pack structures that define relationships throughout the continent begin shifting according to patterns that reflect merit, loyalty, and wisdom, rather than simple dominance hierarchies. Stop, Alpha Prime Aldrich commands, his voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that has reshaped territorial boundaries and ended wars between competing packs. Whatever you're doing, stop it immediately. Why? Nyx asks, her tone carrying genuine curiosity about his objections to changes that benefit the majority of wolves at the expense of privileged minorities. Are you concerned that wolves might discover they don't need alpha permission to determine their own worth? That omegas might realize they possess capabilities that extend far beyond sexual submission and domestic service? That betas might understand they're the foundation that supports your entire system of authority? You're destroying the natural order, Alpha Elena Corvus protests, though her voice lacks conviction as she watches wolves throughout the arena discovering abilities and confidence they never knew they possessed. I'm revealing the natural order, Nyx corrects gently. The system you call natural is artificial construction, maintained through generational suppression of anyone who might challenge its assumptions. True natural order recognizes strength wherever it exists, wisdom wherever it emerges, leadership wherever it proves effective. As her words sink in, as the implications of what she's demonstrating become clear to everyone present, the assembled alphas begin to understand that they're witnessing not just individual awakening, but systemic revolution that could reshape the foundations of continental civilization. But it's the final demonstration that drives home exactly how complete her authority has become. Without warning, without apparent effort, she extends her will toward the luxury boxes where the most powerful wolves on the continent sit, in stunned recognition of their own powerlessness. And one by one, beginning with Alpha Magnus Voss and continuing through every single authority figure present, they find themselves compelled to stand, to step forward, to walk down the ancient stone steps toward where she waits with patience that acknowledges their capitulation as inevitable rather than surprising. They move not because they choose to, but because resistance has become literally impossible when confronted with authority that operates on levels deeper than conscious thought. Their wolf instincts recognize supremacy that makes their own dominance feel like adolescent posturing. Their bodies respond to command that acknowledges no hierarchy except its own primacy. You see, Nyx observes as dozens of the continent's most feared rulers arrange themselves before her in positions of supplication they've never been compelled to assume. The problem with systems based on dominance is that they only function as long as no one discovers power that makes dominance itself seem quaint. When every alpha in the arena has been arranged according to her will rather than their own, when 5,000 wolves stand in acknowledgement of authority that transcends everything they've been taught about natural hierarchy, she addresses the fundamental question that underlies everything they've witnessed. Now we discuss the future, she says, her voice carrying across the arena and beyond its walls, to wolves throughout the surrounding city, who find themselves inexplicably drawn to listen to words that will determine the shape of their world. Because the age of alpha supremacy has ended tonight. What replaces it will be determined by whether you choose adaptation or whether you require more dramatic forms of education. The arena falls silent, except for the sound of 5,000 hearts beating in rhythm they don't control, waiting for the black Lycan to reshape their world according to laws that predate their understanding of power itself. And in that silence, in the space between what has been and what will be, revolution takes root in soil that has been prepared by centuries of suppression that was never quite complete enough to prevent this moment from arriving. The revolution that begins in the arena spreads outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, each wave carrying transformation that reshapes everything it touches according to laws older than recorded history. Within hours of the Black Lycan's awakening, reports flood in from across the continent, Omega wolves suddenly accessing abilities that bypass traditional limitations. Alpha authority structures crumbling as artificial hierarchies reveal their fragile foundations, pack territories reorganizing themselves according to principles that recognize competence rather than inherited dominance. Nyx stands at the center of the storm she has unleashed, no longer the broken prisoner who was thrown into the ring for entertainment, but something that transcends traditional categories of power and authority. The luxury suite that has been hastily converted into her command center overlooks the arena where her transformation began, its windows providing a view of crowds that gather despite orders to disperse, wolves drawn by recognition that operates on levels deeper than conscious understanding. The Northern Territories report complete collapse of existing pack structures, Commander Sarah Voss announces, her voice tight with implications that extend far beyond simple political upheaval. 16 separate alpha bloodlines have been overthrown by coalitions of wolves who claim to be following your example. Traditional hierarchy has been replaced by councils that select leadership based on merit, rather than genetic inheritance. The Eastern Seaboard is experiencing similar disruptions, adds Intelligence Coordinator Marcus Thorne, consulting reports that arrive faster than they can be processed. Though there the changes seem more gradual, alphas retaining authority by demonstrating competence rather than simply claiming birthright. Less violent transition, but equally complete transformation. Nyx listens to these reports with satisfaction that goes deeper than simple revenge for years of systematic oppression. The changes spreading across the continent represent validation of everything she has always believed about the artificial nature of pack hierarchies, that true strength has nothing to do with genetic accidents, and everything to do with character, intelligence, and the willingness to serve something larger than personal ambition. But it's the reports from the Western regions that provide the most troubling intelligence about resistance that could transform social revolution into civil war that tears the continent apart. Alpha Coalition forces are massing along the Meridian River, military analyst Elena Chen reports, her expression grim with awareness that peaceful transformation may not remain an option. Approximately 30,000 wolves under the command of Alpha Prime Magnus Aldrich and his remaining allies. Traditional equipment, modern weaponry, and strategic positioning that suggests they intend to contain your influence through military force. The news doesn't surprise Nyx. She had expected that some alphas would choose warfare over adaptation, that accumulated privilege would not surrender itself without violence designed to preserve power structures that serve minority interests at the expense of majority welfare. But the scale of the resistance suggests coordination that extends beyond simple territorial defense into systematic attempt to restore old hierarchies through military conquest. Their strategy? She asks, studying maps that show troop positions and supply lines that speak of careful planning rather than desperate improvisation. Classic suppression doctrine, Commander Voss replies. Establish containment perimeters around areas affected by the awakening, use superior firepower to eliminate leadership elements, restore alpha authority through controlled application of overwhelming force. Standard response to pack rebellions, adapted for larger-scale operations. And their chances of success? Under normal circumstances, considerable. They possess superior equipment, established command structures, and tactical advantages that come from fighting on familiar terrain against enemies with limited military experience. The assessment is delivered with professional neutrality that doesn't disguise the underlying concern. Social revolution is one thing, but military confrontation against experienced alpha forces could result in casualties that transform liberation into catastrophe. But Nyx has never been particularly concerned with normal circumstances, and the power that has awakened within her operates according to laws that render traditional military advantages irrelevant to the outcome of conflicts she chooses to engage. "Show me their positions," she commands, moving to the tactical display that dominates the center of her command center. The maps that spread before her reveal deployment patterns that demonstrate both the strengths and limitations of conventional alpha thinking. Overwhelming firepower concentrated in defensive positions, supply lines that assume enemy forces will follow predictable attack patterns, strategic planning that accounts for every variable except the possibility that their enemy might not be bound by traditional limitations. "They expect me to field armies," Nyx observes, her finger tracing routes that would be necessary for conventional military response to their challenge. Recruit followers, organize resistance, engage in the kind of territorial warfare that has characterized pack conflicts for centuries. That would be the logical approach to challenging their positions, Commander Voss agrees. Though our intelligence suggests that voluntary recruitment would provide substantial numbers, initial estimates indicate that 70% of wolves affected by the awakening would be willing to serve in organized resistance to Alpha Coalition forces. 70%, Nyx repeats thoughtfully. Impressive response to liberation, but irrelevant to the actual resolution of this conflict. "Ma'am, they're fighting the last war, Commander. Applying strategies that assume their enemy will follow rules that no longer apply to anyone touched by the awakening." Nyx's smile carries implications that make everyone present understand they're about to witness warfare, conducted according to principles that transcend conventional military doctrine. Time to remind them why the Black Lycan was sealed away, rather than simply executed. The demonstration that follows redefines everyone's understanding of what constitutes viable military strategy. Without leaving her command center, without issuing orders to armies that don't exist, without employing any of the traditional tools of warfare, Nyx extends her will across hundreds of miles to touch the minds of wolves who have chosen to resist transformation rather than embrace it. The effect is immediate and absolute. Throughout the Alpha Coalition's carefully prepared positions, wolves find themselves experiencing the same recognition that swept through the arena during her awakening, instinctive understanding that resistance to her authority is not just futile, but fundamentally inappropriate. Command structures that have maintained discipline through decades of military service begin dissolving as officers discover they can no longer compel obedience from subordinates whose loyalty has transferred to authority that transcends traditional pack hierarchy. Strategic positions become meaningless when the wolves defending them refuse to treat approaching enemies as threats worthy of military response. Coalition forces are standing down, Intelligence Coordinator Thorne reports, his voice tight with disbelief at reports that describe capitulation rather than resistance from one of the most disciplined military organizations on the continent. No combat, no casualties, no destruction of equipment. They're simply surrendering. Not surrendering. Nix corrects gently. Awakening. Discovering that the authority they've been serving was never legitimate in the first place. Within 6 hours of her demonstration, the Alpha Coalition that had represented the last organized resistance to continental transformation has dissolved into constituent elements that reorganize themselves according to principles that prioritize service to community welfare over maintenance of artificial hierarchy. The military crisis that had threatened to engulf the continent in civil war ends without violence, conflict, or any of the catastrophic destruction that traditional warfare would have required. But victory over external resistance reveals internal challenges that prove more complex than simple military confrontation. The practical difficulties of replacing hierarchical systems that have governed pack society for centuries with new structures that reflect awakened understanding of natural order. The problem, Dr. Marcus Aldwin explains during the evening briefing session, is that most wolves have no experience with non-hierarchical social organization. They understand dominance and submission, alpha authority and omega obedience, but concepts like collaborative decision-making or merit-based leadership represent completely foreign approaches to pack governance. Which manifests how? Nix asks, studying reports that detail challenges emerging in territories where alpha authority has been overthrown, but replacement structures haven't yet stabilized. Confusion, primarily. Wolves who have been trained to wait for alpha direction finding themselves without clear guidance about how to proceed. Decision-making paralysis in communities that lack experience with democratic processes. Economic disruption in regions where trade relationships were based on hierarchical negotiations that no longer function. The difficulties are real and significant. Social revolution that destroys existing power structures without providing viable alternatives risks creating chaos that serves no one's interests and could destabilize communities that depend on functional governance for basic survival needs. Recommendations? Gradual transition rather than immediate transformation, Dr. Aldwin suggests. Maintain certain hierarchical elements while introducing democratic principles slowly enough that communities can adapt without losing social cohesion. Preserve alpha leadership where it serves community welfare while eliminating authoritarian elements that enforce submission through violence. The proposal is reasonable, practical, and completely at odds with everything the awakening represents. Because the Black Lycan's power doesn't recognize gradual transition as acceptable compromise. It demands authenticity that acknowledges natural order rather than political convenience, that preserves comfortable illusions about illegitimate authority. No, Nick says quietly, her words carrying finality that makes everyone present understand the discussion has ended rather than simply been postponed. Hierarchy based on genetic accidents serves no community welfare that couldn't be better served by leadership that earns authority through competence and wisdom. The awakening demands truth, not comfortable lies designed to preserve familiar dysfunction. But the practical difficulties will be resolved through application of the same principles that ended Alpha Coalition resistance. Wolves who discover their authentic capabilities require no external authority to organize their lives according to patterns that serve their genuine interests. As if to demonstrate her confidence in this assessment, Nyx extends her will once again across the continent, touching the minds of wolves who struggle with unfamiliar freedom, offering not direction, but recognition of their own capacity to create structures that serve their needs without requiring submission to artificial authority. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Communities that had been paralyzed by the absence of alpha leadership, suddenly discovering collaborative capabilities they never knew they possessed. Trade relationships reorganizing themselves according to principles of mutual benefit, rather than hierarchical exploitation. Social problems being addressed through collective wisdom, rather than authority. Ian decree. Magnificent, Dr. Aldwin breathes, monitoring reports that describe transformation occurring faster and more completely than any theoretical framework had suggested was possible. They're creating new social structures in real time, adapting democratic principles to pack culture in ways that maintain community cohesion while eliminating authoritarian elements. Because, Nyx observes with satisfaction that goes deeper than simple political victory, true natural order doesn't require enforcement. It emerges spontaneously when artificial constraints are removed and wolves are free to organize themselves according to their authentic nature. As night falls over the continent that has been reshaped by forces that predate recorded history, Nyx stands at her window overlooking territory that no longer recognizes the authority of alpha bloodlines or the submission of omega classification. Below her, in the arena where her awakening began, thousands of wolves gather not to witness violence, but to celebrate liberation that has revealed capabilities they never knew they possessed. The Black Lycan has fulfilled the destiny that made her sealing necessary. She has reminded the world that all authority exists only by consent of forces powerful enough to withdraw that consent when service becomes oppression. But as reports continue arriving from across the transformed continent, as she reviews intelligence about new challenges that emerge when old solutions no longer apply, Nyx understands that awakening the Black Lycan was only the beginning of changes that will reshape civilization according to laws that recognize strength wherever it exists and wisdom wherever it emerges. The age of alpha supremacy has ended. What replaces it will be determined by whether wolves choose to embrace the freedom she has offered, or whether they will require additional demonstrations of why submission to artificial authority serves no purpose that couldn't be better fulfilled by recognition of authentic power. Standing in her command center overlooking a world that will never again accept the lies that made her imprisonment possible, the Black Lycan smiles with satisfaction that carries implications extending far beyond simple revenge. Because some powers, once awakened, transform everything they touch, and the transformation has only just begun. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Continental Assembly meets in the reconstructed arena where the Black Lycan first revealed herself to a world that had forgotten why some forces were meant to remain sealed. But where once stone walls had echoed with the roar of crowds seeking blood sport, now they resonate with voices raised in collaborative governance that represents wolves from every territory, every background, every point on the spectrum of abilities that had been artificially constrained by hierarchical thinking. Nyx presides over discussions that would have been impossible under the old system. Omega delegates debating trade policy with former alphas who have earned their positions through demonstrated competence. Beta coordinators managing diplomatic relationships that span the continent. Pack councils sharing resources according to need rather than dominance hierarchies that concentrated wealth among genetic minorities. The transformation has not been without challenges. Some territories required multiple interventions as old habits reasserted themselves despite the awakening. Certain bloodlines attempted to restore alpha supremacy through economic manipulation rather than military force, and the integration of awakened abilities with existing social structures created complications that required innovative solutions. But 2 years of evidence have proven that wolves, when freed from artificial constraints, possess collaborative capabilities that far exceed anything achieved through authoritarian hierarchy. Economic productivity has increased as merit-based advancement replaced genetic privilege. Territorial conflicts have virtually disappeared as democratic decision-making eliminated arbitrary dominance disputes, and social cohesion has strengthened as every wolf discovers their authentic value to community welfare. The Southern Territories report complete integration of awakened governance structures. Delegate Sarah Chen announces to the Assembly, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who has watched impossible become inevitable through patient application of principles that recognize natural order. No remaining hierarchical elements, no resistance to democratic processes, and measurable improvement in all indicators of community welfare. Eastern Seaboard concurs, adds former Alpha Magnus Voss, whose transformation from authoritarian ruler to elected representative demonstrates the possibilities available to those who choose adaptation over resistance. Though we recommend continued monitoring of border regions where contact with unchanged territories creates pressure for reversion to old patterns. The discussion that follows explores challenges that have become routine rather than catastrophic. How to maintain awakened consciousness across generations. How to integrate unchanged wolves who seek citizenship in transformed territories. How to balance individual freedom with community welfare in societies that no longer depend on submission to resolve conflicts. But it's the report from the Research Consortium that provides the most significant intelligence about long-term implications of the awakening that began in this arena 2 years ago. Genetic analysis confirms our preliminary findings. Dr. Elena Hartwell explains to the assembled delegates. The abilities emerging through awakened consciousness are not supernatural additions to wolf nature, but restoration of capabilities that were systematically suppressed through generational trauma, chemical intervention, and social conditioning designed to maintain artificial hierarchies. Meaning? Nyx asks, though she suspects she already knows the answer to questions that touch on the deepest mysteries of what occurred when her blood first hit the arena sand. Meaning that every wolf possesses latent potential for the abilities we've been calling awakened consciousness. The black Lycan didn't grant new powers. She revealed authentic nature that had been hidden beneath layers of conditioning designed to prevent exactly this kind of liberation. The implications are staggering in their scope. Not just individual transformation, but species-wide restoration of capabilities that predate recorded history by millennia. The awakening that began with one Omega breaking free from suppressants in a fighting ring has revealed itself as recognition of heritage that connects modern wolves to ancestors whose power shaped the world, according to laws that have been forgotten by civilizations that mistook dominance for strength. How many? Delegate Marcus Thorne inquires, his question reflecting the concerns of communities that have watched their neighbors discover abilities that transform their understanding of what wolves are capable of achieving. Based on current data, approximately 90% of wolves carry genetic markers associated with awakened abilities. The remaining 10% appear to have been affected by hereditary damage that may be irreversible, though even that assessment could change as we develop better understanding of the restoration process. The revelation that the vast majority of wolves possess dormant capabilities that dwarf traditional pack hierarchies in their scope and implications means that the transformation spreading across the continent represents return to authentic nature rather than departure from it. The natural order that Alpha Authority claimed to represent was artificial construction designed to suppress abilities that made hierarchical control impossible to maintain. As the afternoon session concludes and delegates prepare for evening discussions that will shape policies affecting millions of wolves throughout the transformed territories, Nyx makes her way to the arena floor where her journey began with blood, pain, and awakening that no one had anticipated. The sand beneath her feet has been replaced by polished stone that reflects light from windows that have been added to brighten spaces once designed for violence, where Gareth Vane had attempted to destroy what he perceived as defiant Omega weakness. A fountain now flows with water that carries harmonics, suggesting forces operating according to laws that transform conflict into collaboration. She's not alone. Other awakened wolves gather here regularly, drawn by recognition that this space represents the moment when impossible became inevitable, when sealed power broke free from constraints that had held it for generations, when the black Lycan reminded the world why some forces were meant to reshape everything they touch. Any regrets? The question comes from Sarah Voss, whose transformation from Alpha Commander to Democratic Delegate exemplifies the possibilities available to those who choose growth over resistance. About the way it happened, the chaos that followed, the disruption of everything wolves had accepted as normal. No regrets about liberation, Nyx replies, her attention focused on delegates who continue their work in chambers where once powerful alphas had watched from luxury boxes as omegas were thrown to predators for entertainment. About the methods that made liberation necessary, about the years of suppression that required such dramatic intervention, about the suffering that could have been avoided if awakening had been permitted to occur naturally. Those I regret. And the future? What happens when every wolf has access to abilities that make traditional power structures impossible to maintain? The same thing that happens when any oppressed population discovers their authentic capabilities, Nyx observes with satisfaction that goes deeper than personal vindication. They stop accepting lies about their limitations and start creating realities that reflect their actual potential. As evening settles over the continent that has been transformed by forces that predate human understanding of natural law, as millions of wolves organize their lives according to principles that recognize strength wherever it exists and wisdom wherever it emerges, the black Lycan understands that her awakening was never about individual empowerment, but about species-wide recognition of heritage that had been systematically suppressed by those who feared its implications. The revolution that began when blood hit arena sand has revealed itself as restoration of authentic nature that transforms everything it touches, and the transformation has only just begun to reshape a world that will never again accept the comfortable lies that made systematic oppression possible. Because some powers, once awakened, cannot be contained, controlled, or convinced to accept limitations that serve no purpose except the preservation of artificial authority that was never legitimate in the first place. The black Lycan has kept her ancient promise to rise when the need was greatest. Now she watches as every wolf discovers the same truth that ended her imprisonment. True strength cannot be sealed away. It can only be temporarily forgotten, waiting patiently for the moment when blood, pain, and desperation combine to break the bonds that were never strong enough to contain what was always meant to be free. 5 years later, the morning sun streams through the crystal dome that now crowns the arena where the black Lycan first awakened, casting rainbows across the council chamber that has become the heart of continental governance. Where once blood-soaked sand had absorbed the pain of wolves forced to fight for alpha entertainment, now a living garden grows in spirals that mirror the energy patterns Nyx has learned to read in the awakened consciousness of her people. Nyx stands at the center of this transformed space, no longer the broken Omega who was thrown into the ring as disposable entertainment, but something that transcends all previous categories of power and authority. 5 years of guiding continental transformation has refined her abilities in ways that make her original awakening seem like a child's first steps toward mastery that encompasses forces beyond individual comprehension. Around her, representatives from territories that span the globe gather for the annual Assembly of Awakened Consciousness, wolves whose liberation has spread far beyond the continent where her revolution began, carrying recognition of authentic nature to populations that had never imagined freedom from hierarchical oppression was possible. The Australian territories report complete integration, announces Delegate Kai Nakamura, whose journey from Omega suppression to democratic leadership exemplifies the transformation that has reshaped civilization across 6 continents. No remaining alpha resistance, full activation of awakened abilities throughout the population, and unprecedented levels of social cohesion based on collaborative governance rather than dominance hierarchy. European Union confirms similar results, adds Elena Volkov, former alpha whose adaptation to merit-based leadership has proven that even the most entrenched authoritarian attitudes can evolve when confronted with evidence that cooperation serves community welfare better than competition. Though we continue monitoring isolated regions where geographic barriers have limited exposure to awakening consciousness, the reports that follow paint a picture of transformation that has exceeded even Nyx's most optimistic projections when she first broke free from her suppressants in this very space. What began as individual liberation has become species-wide evolution that has revealed abilities dormant in wolf genetics for millennia, telepathic communication that transcends language barriers, collaborative consciousness that allows entire communities to function as unified entities, environmental harmonization that has begun reversing ecological damage accumulated over centuries of hierarchy, exploitation. But it's the report from the deep archives that provides the most profound insight into what the awakening has ultimately revealed about the true nature of wolves and their relationship to forces that shape reality itself. Translation of the pre-hierarchical texts is now complete, Dr. Sophia Chen announces, her voice carrying the weight of discoveries that have redefined their understanding of their own species' history. The documents confirm what awakened consciousness has been demonstrating, that wolves originally existed in symbiotic relationship with planetary systems, serving as conscious intermediaries between individual awareness and collective intelligence that maintained ecological balance across entire continents. The black Lycan, she continues, her attention focused on Nyx with the respect due someone whose awakening has restored capabilities that predate recorded history, was never an individual aberration or supernatural anomaly. She was the prototype for what all wolves were meant to become before hierarchical thinking severed their connection to collaborative consciousness. The revelation that her awakening represents return to original design rather than evolution beyond it sends ripples of understanding through the assembled representatives, because it means that the transformation spreading across the world isn't unprecedented development, but restoration of authentic nature that was systematically suppressed by forces that understood exactly what they were preventing. Who? Asks Marcus Voss, his question reflecting the curiosity of wolves who have spent 5 years discovering abilities they never knew they possessed. Who understood wolf nature well enough to design suppression that lasted for millennia? According to the archives, other species whose evolution had taken different paths, Dr. Chen replies, consulting documents that have required decades of careful translation to reveal their secrets. Beings whose individual consciousness had developed beyond the need for collaborative awareness, who viewed symbiotic intelligence as primitive limitation rather than sophisticated integration. They feared us, Nyx observes, her understanding of the ancient texts reaching levels that transcend conscious translation to touch knowledge that flows through awakened consciousness like inherited memory. Not our physical capabilities or political potential, but our capacity to demonstrate that individual consciousness and collective awareness could coexist in ways that enhanced both, rather than requiring choice between them. The implications extend far beyond simple historical curiosity. If wolf suppression was designed by beings whose evolution had followed paths that prioritized individual development over collaborative consciousness, then the awakening represents more than liberation from hierarchical thinking. It represents proof that cooperation and individual excellence can coexist in ways that surpass anything achievable through purely competitive approaches to existence. "Where are they now?" asks Delegate Sarah Hartwell, her question carrying undertones that suggest concerns about potential resistance to transformation that has spread far beyond what its original architects might have anticipated. "Unknown," Dr. Chen admits. The archives end approximately 3,000 years ago, with references to departure beyond observable space and transition to frequencies that transcend planetary consciousness. Whether that represents physical relocation, dimensional shift, or evolutionary transformation beyond material existence remains unclear. But Nyx, whose connection to awakened consciousness has deepened through 5 years of guiding species-wide transformation, receives information that flows through channels that transcend archival research or conscious analysis. Knowledge that arrives not through study, but through recognition that operates on levels deeper than individual understanding. "They're still here," she says quietly, her awareness touching presences that exist on frequencies that most consciousness cannot perceive. Not physically, not in ways that conventional senses can detect, but as monitoring awareness that observes the results of their ancient intervention. "Hostile monitoring?" Marcus asks, his military background making him evaluate potential threats to communities that have discovered capabilities beyond traditional defensive measures. "Curious monitoring," Nyx corrects gently. They're discovering that their assumptions about the incompatibility of individual and collective consciousness may have been premature. Watching wolves who have transcended hierarchical thinking demonstrate possibilities they never considered viable. As afternoon turns to evening and the assembly continues its work of coordinating transformation that spans the globe, Nyx makes her way to the memorial garden that has been planted where the luxury boxes once elevated alpha authority above the suffering of those they used for entertainment. Here, in soil that has been enriched with ashes of documents that codified hierarchical oppression, flowers grow that exist nowhere else on the planet, species that have emerged through the same awakened consciousness that has restored wolf nature to its authentic capabilities. The garden is not empty. Awakened wolves gather here regularly, drawn by recognition that this space represents the moment when impossible became inevitable, when sealed potential broke free from constraints that had held it for millennia, when the black Lycan demonstrated that some powers cannot be permanently suppressed. Among them is Gareth Vane, the former alpha champion whose attack had triggered her awakening 5 years earlier. His transformation exemplifies the possibilities available to those who choose growth over resistance, from undefeated arena warrior who took pleasure in destroying Omega weakness to collaborative leader whose strength serves community welfare rather than personal dominance. "Any regrets?" he asks. The same question that has been posed by countless wolves who have watched their world transform in ways that would have been unimaginable before blood hit arena sand and ancient power remembered itself. About the awakening? None. About the necessity that made such dramatic intervention required? Many. Nyx's attention encompasses gardens that bloom with impossible beauty, chambers where democratic governance has replaced authoritarian decree, territories across the world where wolves organize their lives according to principles that recognize authentic nature rather than artificial hierarchy. About the suffering that could have been avoided if awakening had been permitted to occur naturally rather than requiring revolutionary force to break suppression that should never have been implemented. And the future? The question carries weight that extends beyond immediate curiosity, because 5 years of transformation have revealed that the awakening that began in this arena represents only the beginning of changes that will ultimately reshape not just wolf society, but the fundamental relationship between consciousness and reality itself. The future, Nyx says, her awareness touching possibilities that stretch beyond current understanding, belongs to wolves who have rediscovered what they were always meant to be, and to whatever emerges when individual excellence and collective wisdom combine in ways that transcend everything their ancient suppressors thought was possible. Above them, stars shine with light that carries harmonics, suggesting forces operating according to laws that recognize no boundaries between individual awareness and universal consciousness. And in that light, in the space between what has been achieved and what remains to be discovered, the Black Lycan understands that her awakening was never about ending oppression, but about beginning exploration of possibilities that have no limits except those imposed by imagination. Because some powers, once awakened, transform not just those who wield them, but the fundamental nature of existence itself, and the transformation that began when blood broke ancient seals has only just begun to reveal what wolves were always meant to become. The revolution is complete. The evolution has just begun. And in the garden that grows where violence once reigned, impossible flowers bloom with beauty that exceeds anything hierarchical thinking ever imagined possible, living proof that authentic nature, when freed from artificial constraints, creates realities that surpass the dreams of those who thought power could be permanently contained. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.